Live. Did you work there, friend? Okay, I'm live on YouTube and I'm live on Facebook. Awesome. Okay, so I wanted to discuss, these are foundation talks. I wanted to discuss signs, Ezekiel, and the nature of reality. Okay, signs and the nature of reality. So Yeshua, I pray that you would bless this time. Help me to be someone who testifies to Scripture, who's a herald, who testifies to truth. Give me understanding. Help me to set my heart to understand Scripture so that we might do it and respond to it rightly. So one of the things you're going to run into, and I think I'm going to make this talk stick to Ezekiel 1 through, we'll just say for now, maybe 14. You're going to notice something. You're going to notice the word sign. What is a sign? What is a sign?
Something that points to something else.
Something that points to something else. Yes. How does the word sign typically get used in Christian circles? When they read the New Testament, for example, Jesus did signs.
Like miracles.
Exactly. It tends to be spoken of in terms of signs and wonders.
Like it's an
miracles.
end in and of itself.
Like it's an end in and of itself. Like it's like it tends to be a wonderful work that is just performed. Okay. Now the word sign does indicate, okay, it's pointing to something else. But the word sign here is really weird in Ezekiel. Let me give you an example. One of the first signs in Ezekiel is to draw a picture of Jerusalem on a clay tablet. The city. You're supposed to draw a picture of it. Then he is supposed to lay siege to it by creating a wall with an iron pot. And he's to set his face against the iron pot, and he'll lay siege to it. And he'll be a sign.
What does that mean, to lay siege?
To lay siege is the idea that if you have a walled city, that you would surround the walled city and hem them in, to wait them out with an army, typically. But Ezekiel himself performs this, and him doing this in front of the people is the prophecy. So he literally draws a picture of Jerusalem on a clay tablet, brings that out into public, puts a wall with an iron pot, and puts his face up against it, and he's doing this, he's pantomiming this. And this act itself, all of this action, okay, all of these arranged actions and components, okay, they all comprise the sign. The onlookers in Judah would see Ezekiel doing this, and his actions and the seal and all of it together would be a sign that ought to be understood, that ought to be deciphered. This is an archaic word. We normally use it in math. We don't use it this way anymore, but I'm trying to bring it back. Parabolic. That's a math term, but it also means that which is related to parables. Okay? In this picture, we have a prophet that is himself a living parable. A living, pantomimed parable. Okay? In Ezekiel, we literally hear Yahweh say to the Son of Man, to Ezekiel, who's the Son of Man, which just means Ben Adam, human, okay? His human messenger. He says to Ezekiel, you are a sign. This is very similar to, it's incredibly similar to the role of Yeshua the Messiah. So if we want to understand what Messiah came to do, we ought to understand how signs work and what the nature of reality is. I say the nature of reality because there are really complicated signs within Ezekiel. There are signs within signs. And this idea of signs speaks to the idea of encoding. Okay? Encoding truth. All right? And this idea of encoding truth directly speaks to how humans are arranging themselves as imagers before God. Because Ezekiel will put the charge against the people that where their idolatry begins is not in the temple and is not in the high places. It actually uses very strange language, temple language, and says that idolatry for Israel, for Judah, starts in their hearts. It uses the language that they actually set up idols within their hearts. So if we're to use the idea, if we would say that based on the pattern that that reveals the pattern that Moses was supposed to build the tabernacle according to, that same pattern informs the image of God. That same pattern informs how humans are constructed and how humans should be understood. The idea that we have this outer courtyard, and this inner tent, and this innermost tent, and this ark. Okay, that's actually a way to understand what a human is. Okay, mereologically, dividing a human up into its parts. Well, in Ezekiel, Yahweh is saying, inside you, humans are setting up idols inside themselves. They're arranging themselves, okay, and they're setting up an image. This is a kind of, the reason God would encode truth would then reveal whether who's an idolater or not, because those who are idolaters would be like idols. They would have eyes, but not see. They would have ears, but not hear. Idolaters. Because idols have eyes, but don't see. They have ears, but don't hear. They have mouths, but they don't speak. And so God would give parables, encoded truths, that essentially to prove and test people's arrangement, to prove and test people's hearts. This is literally why Yeshua, Isaiah 6 talks about a similar thing. This is why Yeshua, his entire ministry is about signs and parables. He speaks to people in riddles. He speaks to people in parables. But you can kind of get the idea that there are almost components of his visions that are themselves riddles and parables. For example, here's a really, really deep read. If heaven and earth were to appear to Ezekiel in a shorthand form, what would it look like? If heaven and earth were to appear to Ezekiel in a little tiny, small caricature or a truncated form, what would it look like? Well, it would look like the glory of Yahweh enthroned on a firmament on the backs of cherubim. And the cherubim actually represent, in a sense, they kind of represent the seen realm. All of the areas of the seen realm, which would have four faces. One's like a bull, one's like an eagle or a bird, one's like a man, and another's like, I can't remember what the fourth is. Fish. Another's like something else, but it's the idea of the aretz, the land, the seen realm. So it's the idea that it's almost like heaven is the control room that's dictating what happens on the back of the earth, and Yahweh is sitting on the throne maneuvering it. It's a very, very powerful image. Okay, so when he sees Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh, when Ezekiel sees the glory of Yahweh, it is hard to just say, it's hard to explain what he's seeing. What is the significance of it? Now this might be, this is part of the problem is we have God occupying the highest reality imaginable, revealing himself to a human. Our sight, so take it like this. Humans have a range of sight. Literal light. We have a range of light that we can perceive, and there's something outside of that range that we can't, like ultraviolet radiation. If God were to reveal himself in ultraviolet rays, being ridiculous here, okay, give a vision in that form. Only bees can see, right? So the point is, you wouldn't be able to perceive God even if he was trying to make himself known in that form. Well, here's an added problem. And it literally isn't answered by Scripture. So the question's open. The question is open for interpretation. When we look around and see things around us, do we see how things actually are, Or do we see what our brain constructs? In other words, the question is like, can we trust our eyes? Can we literally trust our eyes? When we say a thing is actually there, is it there, or did our brain construct the idea that it's there? An example is this: here's something that's actually going on. If you could look at your hand right now, in all the ranges of, we'll think of it like fields of vision in terms of magnified. If you could look at your hand and see all the magnified ranges,
I'm so disgusted and distracted.
well, you would feel fine, and you'd see a war going on in your palm. You'd see monstrous creatures devouring each other and fighting each other. That's not useful to you right now, so you don't see that. But you not seeing it, does that mean it's not there? Those are microcosmic realities. And yet those microcosmic realities are themselves made up of deeper microcosmic realities. Layer on layer on layer. It's like the Men in Black, scary stuff, right? What about macrocosmic realities? Is it possible that we are like a cell inside of a much larger space and entity? Okay. And there are larger realities that are taking place, and we're in a lower order part. What happens if God comes down to a lower order part and tries to reveal himself? What would you see? Well, Ezekiel 1 seeks to kind of answer that question. That is what you would see. But it's almost like the form that you see him is itself a sign. It is itself encoded truth that needs to be decoded, that those who have the eyes to see will see, those who have the ears to hear will hear. Yeah.
Yahweh, you're talking about Yeshua's life, or you're talking about Yahweh revealing himself like to Ezekiel?
Right now I'm talking about Yahweh revealing himself to Ezekiel, because how Yahweh reveals himself to Ezekiel is key in the narrative of Israel, and the exiles of Judah. We have a gospel because of the tragic, traumatic events that occur in Ezekiel. That's why we have a gospel. So another way to say this is the gospel is good news. Okay? The good news is the message of Yeshua, which is the message of Yahweh tinting among us. John 1:14, the word became flesh and tinted among us, right? It's Yahweh coming into our midst. Yahweh tinted among Israel in Exodus 40. Okay? Why would this be good news? Hasn't Yahweh always tinted among people? Well, he did up to a certain point, and he left. That's the bad news. The good news.
Ezekiel is the bad news.
Ezekiel is the bad news. The book of Ezekiel is the bad news, specifically chapters 9 through 11. Okay? So in chapters 9, but here's the other thing. That's the first half of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is an incredible book because at the end of Ezekiel, it literally describes the new heavens, the new earth, and the new temple and its dimensions. So it prophesies the present tense, contemporaneous tragedy that's going on, Yahweh leaving, but then it also prophesies of the future restoration of God returning to be among his people again. So Ezekiel has both in view. It has the bad news realized, and it has the good news prophesied, but not yet fulfilled. The good news begins to materialize. The good news that's kind of alluded to at the end of Ezekiel, it starts to materialize with a single building block, the cornerstone. The cornerstone of the new temple, which is Messiah. So one of the things that Ezekiel shows us is we don't have a good news without bad news, and the bad news is firmly located in Ezekiel 9 to 11. It's essentially where the glory of Yahweh leaves the temple, and it doesn't come back. What do we got here? All right, we got quite a few people. Cool. Hey, everybody. So the bad news is in Ezekiel 9 to 11. Yahweh, basically, the spirit of Yahweh grabs Ezekiel by the hair, okay, and brings him to the temple in chapter 8, and then begins to take him on a course. The purpose of the series of visions that happens in 9 to 11 is revealed in chapter 8. Yahweh is making Yechezkel, who is a priest, he's using him as a witness. He's in exile, and he's using Yechezkel, he's using Ezekiel as a witness, and he's saying, I'm about to walk you through my temple, and I'm about to show you all the reasons that I have to leave. And he literally uses the language in chapter 8 They are profaning my space, and uses language like he's being pushed out. They're driving me from this place. They're driving me from this place. So he puts forward an argument. They're driving me from this place. And then he begins to quantify that argument. He begins to substantiate testimony as to how they're doing it. He starts from the outermost part of the temple, and he just brings Ezekiel in. And shows him, look at all the terrible things they're doing in my temple. Look at the way they're carving images in the wall. Look at all these people that are leaders, but they're deceiving the people. Look at the men who have their backs to me. They're doing the worst thing you could do in the temple. They're turning their backs to the west, and they're facing the east to bow down and worship the sun. Literally, it's the opposite of how you conduct yourself. The Torah explains that you enter the temple from the east, and you move toward the west. Reality itself is the sun rising in the east and moving towards its destination in the west. And we too follow that pattern. Our destination is Yahweh, who's enthroned in the Holy of Holies. So we're supposed to follow the sun. It's supposed to remind us that our destiny is to be in the Holy of Holies, okay? And these guys have their backs to Yahweh, and they're weeping for Tammuz, another god, and they're worshiping Shamash, or the sun, okay? And he takes them on this series of revelations and visions. This is what would be called an ecstatic vision. He's like yanked out of himself into this reality. Okay, just there. Overwhelming prophecy. This is not, Ezekiel doesn't have the ability in this encounter to be like, I wonder if this is really happening, or this is like, pinch yourself. It's happening to me. And basically, Yahweh leaves the Holy of Holies, and you see him transition to another area, the threshold of the temple. His glory, his radiance fills it, and then it moves to the courtyard, then it moves to the gate, and he goes to this region outside the temple, and he goes up. And we don't have any indication in Scripture that he came down again. Yeah, that's right, Elizabeth. That's right. Follow the sun. S-O-N. That's exactly right. So this is the bad news. This is the bad news. The bad news is, if you've ever wondered, how could the God of the cosmos, how could El Elyon, the Most High God, how could he ever allow his spiritual turf to be defeated by Babylon and by proxy, their Elohim and their gods that they're in alliance with? He would never do that. This is the theological revelation that demonstrates your protection is gone. Your identity is gone. Moshe said the thing that distinguished Israel from the rest of the nations is no other nation had a God who came with them and went with them. He is describing the unique setup of tabernacle and temple, this arrangement that the highest God would say, only worship me, and I'll live in one shrine, and I'll be accessible to you, and we'll eat together, and I'll speak from between the cherubim, and we'll interact. This is it's such a peculiar arrangement. This arrangement is purposefully described at the end of Exodus 40 to kind of be it's like a bookend to Genesis 1-3. It's like Eden is on track to being restored when the tabernacle is set up, the people are rightly arranged, and Yahweh is enthroned, and his glory fills that tabernacle. So Exodus 40, the glory of Yahweh filling that tabernacle, ends up being overturned. It ends up being overturned here in a really dramatic way. And he's essentially abandoning his land and his people to other gods. And so this, by the way, what does he sit on in the physical temple? Imagine this as his throne, okay? That's the ark, though, okay? Well, imagine that as the ark, okay? And actually, the irony is yes, the ark would be the cherubim that he sits on. What do you call a kingdom that has an empty throne? Well, it's not a kingdom anymore. Vis-a-vis, the kingdom of heaven is gone. In other words, the bad news is heaven doesn't reign. The kingdom of heaven is gone because the kingdom of heaven no longer reigns on earth. The throne is not occupied anymore. So it would make sense that this would be the bad news, and the good news that would follow on the heels would be the kingdom of heaven has returned. The kingdom of heaven has, I'm proclaiming to you the kingdom of heaven. It is among you. It's here. He's returned. These ideas would have been central to Jews listening to speakers. Okay, speakers who are saying, "Hey, the kingdom of God has arrived. The kingdom of God is in our midst." Okay, repent, for the kingdom of God has arrived. It's come. This kind of language would have perked up the ears of Jewish exiles and Jews who were in the land ruled by Rome. So that's the bad news. And at the heart of the bad news, if you wanted to paint the bad news with a sign, a picture, the sign would be an ornate and beautiful ark. Okay? An ornate and beautiful ark that is abandoned. So if you guys have to dip, I know you have to dip. Yeah.
I don't want to go.
Yeah.
I can stay. Maybe. I'm saying so he's not talking to nobody. Okay, cool.
So.
See you for my grad another day. Don't leave John's Island without me. Okay, I love you. Love you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so a sign or a symbol of the bad news is an ornate and beautiful ark in Shlomo, Solomon's temple. It's empty, unoccupied. That's the bad news. The occupied throne, the glory occupying the throne, would be the reversal of this. So, here's a weird phrase. Okay, if the bad news is to be reversed, the bad news is to be reversed by good news. The good news has to look like this. If the bad news is an unoccupied throne or abandoned throne is a better way to say it, then the reoccupation of the throne in Jerusalem is the good news.
Yeah.
The reoccupation, that looks like cup, that's not spelled. The reoccupation of the throne in Jerusalem. Okay, the reoccupation of the throne in Jerusalem is the good news. But here's a weird piece, and this is one of the Yeshua exploited the confusion around this idea. I have to be specific. Reoccupation of the thrones, plural, in Jerusalem is the good news. Mm-hmm. The reoccupation of plural thrones, David's throne and Yahweh's throne. You want to complicate it? The reoccupation of the anointed messiahs and their rulership. So the reoccupation of the Davidic throne, the reoccupation of the office of the high priest by the right heir, and the reoccupation of the ark. These ideas are so there is no. This is the idea of the kingdom of heaven. If the kingdom of heaven rules among earth, we have these three components, which would then be bizarre because part of the question is they stumble over the stumbling stone, which is the Messiah. He is a living parable, and he purposefully doesn't answer them directly. So when they say, "Who are you? Are you the son of David? Are you the prophet Moshe talked about? What are you?" Okay? They're trying to figure out, in a way you could say, what throne is he trying to occupy? Now, they would never dream that Yeshua would occupy the throne of glory. They would never dream of it because it's bizarre. It makes no sense. There's no precedent for it. There are precedents for it in the Torah, okay? But there'd be no seeing himself taking on the form of a slave and being handed over in the world. Let people judge and assess him, okay? What throne is he worthy of? What throne should he occupy? This is why he purposefully uses a psalm, okay, multiple times in the earliest, most primitive gospel in Mark. He uses it, and then it's all over the New Testament after that. But in his earthly ministry, he used a psalm, Psalm 110. Psalm 110 is entirely about enthronement. It's about a priest king, but we don't know if the priest king is Yahweh or not. It's a very strange psalm because it starts with, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." That's the gospel, okay? Yeshua exploits this confusion with this single song. And by asking the question, whose son is the Messiah, or whose father is the Messiah? Okay, he's David's son. Why then does David call him Lord? Remember, Lord is itself a play on words in Yeshua's day, because they don't use Lord has become a proper name for Yahweh because they've stopped using Yahweh's name. So he's able to be tricky even when he's explaining a parable. Okay, and it's very ambiguous, it's not clear. But he makes it more explicit by when he basically obeys the high priest. I adjure you by the living God, are you the son of the Most High and the Blessed One? Okay, this is what Caiaphas says. And what does Yeshua do? He basically gives away the trick. And he says, I'll tell you how I read Psalm 110. I read it in light of Daniel 7:13, which basically reveals, those two together reveal that he thinks that he is Yahweh. This is why Caiaphas said he tears his robe, because he is saying, you are saying that you are the cloud rider, you're the one enthroned at the right hand, and another way for them to say that you are God is to say you are enthroned in the heavenly holy of holies. The idea that he will himself be enthroned is for them a theological nightmare. That another way to say I am God is to say I sit on the throne or at the right hand. One of the biggest problems with Yeshua's claim is that he will sit at the right hand of the Father. Only Yahweh sits. His servants attend him and wait on him. So that even the claim I sit is itself just audacious. And that's this is what's so sad about it is the very start, at the attempt to reverse the bad news with the good news. The good news itself is too shocking to the religious authorities, and they hate it. They despise the good news. And they end up, in despising it, they end up by how they treat it. They end up revealing the idolatry of their own heart, and they end up enthroning him. That's part of the trick, this cosmic trick. This cosmic trick is alluded to in Acts. It's spoken of a little more clearly in 1 Corinthians, where Paul said, if they'd known they were crucifying the Lord of glory, they wouldn't have done it. The powers wouldn't have done this. So a lot of different stuff covered. I don't know if there's any more questions. We're almost at 30 minutes. And I don't know if I want to slam other people with more information, fire hose them. But this is definitely, it's worth thinking about, and we could go further with it. Yeah. Anything else?
No, I need to read Ezekiel. Damn.
Yeah. Yeah, Ezekiel's a great place. And I'm telling you, Ezekiel has direct fulfillment by Yeshua.
Yeah.
Particularly the Passion Week. Ezekiel sets the stage for a prototype that Yeshua is going to exploit. What is Yeshua is at the center of his ministry. Some scholars who study the history of Jesus or the Jesus movement will say it's the Messianic secret. But the Messianic secret is at the core of Messiah's agenda. He puts his own name out there. Mm-hmm. Literally. One of the Yeshua is humble, but he knows he's the Messiah. And one of the ways, it's one of these often overlooked aspects. He sends 72 people out, in addition to the 12, okay? 2 by 2, he sends them out. And what do they go proclaiming? His name. Okay? Yeah. They have gone out into pockets. You can imagine the religious authorities are like, what the hell is going on? First off, miracles are happening. That's strange enough. But the insistence on how Jews have exorcists. They have miracle workers in Yeshua's day. Yeah. But these are strange because every one of these signs is being performed in the name of some Galilean named Yeshua. He purposefully puts his name out there. But what he doesn't do is reveal what or who he is or what his name signifies. Who the hell are you? Is a way to describe Yeshua's earthly ministry. Who are you? How do we know this? Yeshua himself tests his innermost disciples and he says, who do you say that I am? That's actually that's the test. That's the Chinese finger trap in the test of the gospel, which is what Isaiah 53 is about, which is what Paul means. We used to regard Yeshua according to the flesh. We no longer do. We now regard him according to the spirit. Yahweh has basically said, your eternal destination and your eternal future is synonymous with how do you judge my son? Who is he? How you answer the question, who is Yeshua, determines the outcome of your reality. That's mind-boggling, but it's partly why it's brought low. The gospel is, Yeshua says, I'm pleased, Father, you didn't reveal this to the learned and the educated, but to little children. This is partly why the thief on the cross is literally able to enter into the good news of Yeshua. All he has to do, he answers the question correctly when he says, when he answers the question, who is Yeshua, correctly when he says, remember me when you come into your Father's house, when you come into your Father's glory, your Father's authority, this kind of thing. It's enough. It's enough. So Yeshua, he does two things at once. He thrusts his name out into the public sphere, like outrageously, audaciously, with signs and wonders and miracles and strange nobodies proclaiming him, but for some reason having the authority to reverse leprosy and death and all this, and demon possession, all this kind of stuff. So he puts his name out there in the public sphere, and he offers them no help whatsoever in helping them, giving them the answer to the question, who am I? And actually confuses them further when he speaks on purpose. So that when they say, tell us plainly now who you are. Okay, I'll give you another parable to confuse you. Okay, that's just what he really is not. He's not. He's not going to help in that regard. So this is there's a lot of different issues we could touch on, but yes, you should read Ezekiel because Ezekiel basically lays out a lot of different pools. So you think of it this way: Ezekiel offers different pools to draw from to answer the question, who is the Messiah? What is the Messiah?
Why did he come? As in, like, that's what Ezekiel, well, you can't really understand the gospel unless you know really why. Like, what is the covenant that he fulfilled? If you don't know the entire story before, you don't know how beautiful and sweet it is the return actually was. When they're like, the kingdom is near. You have no idea how far it's been, like, in that regard.
Yes, that is a good question. Who am I is directly related to what is the claim on who I am trying to accomplish. Now, I will say that the first question you have to answer is, we always have to answer, what was he trying to establish for Israel first?
Yeah.
Because he didn't come to do anything for the Gentiles in his earthly ministry. Okay. He came to, that's not until after he dies and accomplishes redemption that it's expanded.
Yeah.
And he knows that will be the result when he says, I have other sheep that are not from this pen that I'll bring in, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in his earthly ministry, he doesn't touch it. So everything he's accomplishing for Israel first. Mm-hmm. The gospel's for the Jew first, and then for the Gentile. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, now that's great. Read Ezekiel. Bless you guys. Peace.
I know that
wait a second, let's see. In the stream ending.